The other day I noticed that the MGTOW subreddit had been quarantined and thought to myself, well, this isn't an extremely unusual event or anything. This kind of stuff is happening everywhere. Anytime you counter the approved narrative that these San Francisco-based social media companies want people to be exposed to, anytime you expose them to something different, you're going to run into trouble like this. And if you have the opinion of Reddit that it's a waste of time, that it's trash, I get it, especially when it comes to MGTOW. If you think that the MGTOW subreddit was somehow very superficial, and I don't feel this way. I know this is the opinion out there for a lot of MGTOW guys that the MGTOW subreddit was kind of nonsense. I really do, and I can sympathize with that. In my darker, more elitist moments, I do think of MGTOW as something special that I found, and F the blue pill guy who's too stupid to find it on his own. But I think in a perfect world, or in a more sane world, the better state of affairs is that your sort of normie guys, your regular Joe out there, should have the ability to come across information that moves him in a positive direction towards self-preservation and protecting himself from the gynocentric system and foolish involvement with women, ignorant involvement with women, let's say. I don't think there's, in a sane world, I don't think there's a problem with that. Now, we live in anything but a sane or perfect world, so of course there are people who look at that as the most problematic thing ever, that guys are learning things that help them. Right, so I look at things like the MGTOW subreddit as just when I'm thinking right, I believe. When I have a more positive attitude and I'm looking at things in a proper light, let's say. I think of things like the MGTOW subreddit as helping your normal guy out there, your average guy, to get to where he might need to be. Now, MGTOW isn't for everybody, but if it's helping guys avoid getting gouged in family court, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with the average guy getting an opportunity to avoid all that, to avoid getting raked over the coals, by alimony and child support? So I think the last time I visited the MGTOW subreddit before it was quarantined, it had somewhere near 150,000 members. And I found that pretty impressive. I mean, MGTOW is still a small community. I don't know what you want to call it. It's a relatively unknown philosophy. Let's put it that way. So when I see a forum on Reddit, that's getting 150,000 members and it's MGTOW, that to me is a sign of something. Positive, negative, I'll let people argue that out. In my mind, it's very positive. And when I say people argue, I mean MGTOW guys argue it out, whether or not the popularity of the MGTOW subreddit is a good thing. Of course, everybody else out there their hair is going to get on fire. They're going to go screaming off of bridges over it. And, it's going to be the end of the world. So it got quarantined. And again, I didn't make much of it. Stuff like this happens all the time. Why should I make a big deal out of it? In fact, at this point, it kind of shows me that we're, quote, winning, unquote, if you want to look at it that way, that they're in panic mode. But after I looked into it a little more, I found out that the rabbit hole might run a little deeper on this. And I think that's why I wanted to make this video, because I think we need to take this a little more seriously than just another social justice warrior band fest. I think it might be a little more than that. And let me explain why I feel that way. And in the effort of keeping this video short and punchy and to the point, maybe the best way to do that is just to go over to my Gab account and scare up the screen capture that I posted there about this story. So let's go ahead and read that. U.S. Coast Guard officer facing gun charges researched, quote, how to rid the U.S. of Jews, unquote, court docs reveal. And this is, of course, a Vice article. The second anything like this goes down, the progressive news outlets are all over it, especially places like Vice. He extensively researched bomb-making manuals, sniper attacks, quote, killing school, unquote, I don't know what that is, So if anybody does, enlighten me in the comments section, please. Firearms and tactical gear and incels, and downloaded the manifestos of far-right terrorists, such as Anders Breivik, who killed 77 people in Norway in 2011. Now, this article is talking about Christopher Hassan, I think it's Hassan. I don't actually know how to pronounce his last name, but I'm sure you've heard of this guy. He's the Coast Guard officer who got arrested when, I guess, his online posts or some kind, because he's a pseudo-governmental employee, maybe his internet activity was being sniffed and snooped upon by some federal authorities. Somehow his online activity threw off some warning signals, threw off some flares. And the feds showed up and arrested him. And they found a number of weapons in his possession, which I believe were all legally purchased and legally owned. If you know more about this story, correct me on that if that's not the case. But the big thing they burned him on was the fact that he had silencers, which are illegal in some states, and Washington, D.C., where he was actually physically apprehended. And he had some kind of prescription drug in his possession that wasn't prescribed to him. You know, he obviously bought it or got it from a friend or whatever, or dealer or whatever. He illegally had in his possession, in his residence in Maryland, which they obviously searched thoroughly, an opiate prescription drug, right? And so that then turned because they have all these anti-gun laws on the books, and, you know, if you slip up in one way, a legally owned gun is no longer legal. So if you're a drug addict, you're not allowed to possess guns. Now, I don't know if that's a federal law or if that's a Maryland law, the state of Maryland. For those of you who are not U.S. citizens who don't know what Maryland is, it's a state in the United States. So if you're a drug addict, you're not allowed to possess weapons. So, you know, that magically turned whatever legally purchased guns he owned into illegal guns. So he got hit with all these charges, right? Now you can see underlined in red here in my screen capture of my post on Gab that I think I highlighted the important part for us, for MGTOW guys. The search history also reveals Hassan's deep familiarity with the conspiracies, memes, and ideas driving the modern global far right. For example, his most frequently visited website was the subreddit Men Going Their Own Way, MGTOW, an online misogynistic hub, which he visited tens of thousands of times between 2017 and 2019, according to a 120-page report from the Department of Homeland Security's Insider Threat Division. Okay, that's the gist of this video. That's the important kernel there. So I'm thinking that this is the real reason why the MGTOW subreddit got shut down, got quarantined. And don't kid yourselves. All they're trying to do is, you know, they have this excuse now. All they're trying to do is keep normal guys who are still feeding into their bullshit gynocentric system. They're putting hoops of fire between them and information that might help them get out of that terrible situation they're in, where they're just being used by a bunch of people who, you know, talentless people who can't do what men can do to keep society running. So they got to keep men clueless, right? I mean, we all know, I'm preaching to the choir here. We all know why MGTOW exists. So what they want to do, they see, you know, the powers that be at Reddit see that this subreddit is getting very popular, and, you know, the sweat is forming on their brow. They're panicking. So they're looking for a reason to shut it down. They are desperate to link us MGTOW guys to extremist violence, to a terrorist event. And they finally got a little kernel here, something they could grasp onto. Now, I don't know if it's a case of the authorities getting in contact with the powers that be at Reddit, or if it's just the fact that Reddit is riddled with social justice warriors who read Vice and they took it upon themselves. It really doesn't matter. Somehow, some way, this case, this trial, has led to the quarantining and what I will say will be the eventual deletion of the MGTOW subreddit. So they now have, the powers that be, the various liberal interests, let's say, at these social media sites now have that little thin thread that they can hold on to link us MGTOW guys to something horrible and horrendous, right? I mean, we all know it's tenuous and stupid, but they're going to run around like it's the great link in the chain they've been looking for and the end of the world. And so I want to, at this point, I want to remind everyone about an event in Dayton, Ohio, not too long ago, a few months ago. A man named Connor Betts ended up killing, I believe it was 10 people and injuring somewhere around 30. I think the original death toll the day of his shooting was 9, and then one of the people that he injured ended up passing away, unfortunately, not too long afterward. And the interesting thing about Connor Betts was it turned out that he was a progressive Antifa type. Now, there are some people who would argue against that he was another right-wing shooter. Okay, that's fine. But the funny thing is here, so with Christopher Hasson, we hear about what website, what forum, what Reddit, what subreddit that he visited most often, right? Whether or not you think Connor Betts was right-wing, left-wing, I mean, those terms, any more right-wing, left-wing means nothing. It's really, at this point, the online debate really has moved on from right-wing, left-wing arguments to, a more nationalism versus globalism argument. And, of course, identitarian versus individualist. For better or worse, whatever your opinion on this is, the fact of the matter is ethno-nationalists have moved the conversation, I guess to their credit for being able to achieve this, they've moved the conversation from a left-wing versus right-wing debate discussion to more of an identitarian versus individualist debate discussion, right? And of course, like I said, a more nationalist versus globalist debate discussion. And there's a lot of racial component in there. You'll even see guys like Richard Spencer promoting or arguing for Bernie Sanders' candidacy. So obviously, this is, Richard Spencer, however many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, would have been clearly defined as right-wing, right? And I think to this day, clueless Antifa types still label him as right-wing. But he does have, now he's supporting Bernie Sanders out of his disappointment for Trump, right? People like Richard Spencer believe that Trump has not made good on his promises. So it's kind of a rebellious promotion of Sanders, right? But regardless, I think there are some ways in which Bernie Sanders' platform does sync up with what Richard Spencer has in mind. Now, Richard Spencer, you could argue, is a socialist to some degree, not unlike Bernie, but the fact of the matter that Richard Spencer is an ethno-socialist, if I can coin a term. So Connor Betts could have been, he could be described as right-wing from a progressive's mentality, thought process, but in the overall scheme of things, whether or not he's left-wing and right-wing doesn't matter anymore. It's silly to get hung up on this left-wing, right-wing thing and not move on to a more meaningful discussion. That's my only point here. I mean, you can keep arguing left-wing, right-wing, but people are going to be arguing past you. They've moved on, and you haven't. So it's probably in your best interest to drop that and get with the program, I guess. The ethno-nationalists have sort of moved the online conversation beyond that unnecessary left-wing, right-wing thing. And it doesn't matter what Connor Betts' left or right leanings were, okay? The fact of the matter is, unlike Christopher Hasson, who I will remind you only fantasized online about pulling something off, he never actually got to the point where he did anything. He never actually injured anyone or killed anyone. But unlike Christopher Hasson with Connor Betts, we never heard what his most visited website or forum was. Because I can guarantee you, whatever his right-left leanings were, his most visited forum was some socialist website, some Antifa website, some pro-Bernie Sanders, some pro-Elizabeth Warren site. They're never in a million years going to shut something like that down because they're all liberals out there in San Francisco running these sites. So of course they're never going to do that. Of course that's not going to be shut down. Of course the websites that Connor Betts visits aren't a problem, right? But if somebody daydreaming about doing something and posting about ridding the United States of Jews and, the MGTOW, I'm sure there are guys within the manosphere, within the MGTOW community, let's call it, who are putting a lot of thought into the JQ, as they call it. I'm one of those people. I am wondering. I'm just out there looking at information. I'm never going to motivate myself to Christopher Hasson or Connor Betts level. I'm not interested in it in that level. The fact of the matter is, the basic MGTOW philosophy has nothing to do with anti-Semitism or trying to purge the U.S. of Jews, or who knows, maybe even Christopher Hasson was just researching how to reduce what he sees as an anti-traditional progressive Jewish influence, like somebody like Kevin McDonald is trying to do without any violence. But, it's in this paranoid day, it sends off all these warning flares for authorities that don't have much of an appreciation for free speech, let's say. But again, MGTOW has nothing to do with that stuff. I mean, there certainly are guys in the MGTOW community who are going to fall out on both sides of the JQ and, like me, be in the ambivalent center just listening to the discussion because I'm interested in all discussions. I'm interested in what Kevin McDonald, who wrote The Culture of Critique, has to say, as well as being interested in what Destiny, full-fledged, full-blown progressive, has to say on it, and what Jewish people have to say on it. So, all of that, irrespective of all of that, the fact of the matter is Christopher Hasson visiting a MGTOW subreddit has nothing to do with his desire to purge the U.S. of Jews or Jewish influence. It's ridiculous to link the two. But I do want to hear the arguments on either side. I want to hear it from ethno-nationalists, and I want to hear it from the left, people like Destiny. I recently listened to the debate between Destiny and Mike Enoch. It was a fairly interesting debate. Now, I disagreed with most of what Destiny said, but I appreciated that Destiny took part in the conversation because at this point, cancel culture won't even take part in the conversation. That's their whole thing. They do what the social justice warriors at Reddit did to the MGTOW subreddit. They just cancel it. They take it out of the conversation because they can't argue against it. And it's funny, I see little dribs and drabs of this in my videos. Like, there's somebody recently, this is a bit of a digression, and forgive me, I will get to my major point here, and I will close out this video and try to keep it short. But somebody recently posted a comment under one of my videos that my videos sound like I spend most of my time anticipating the comments. And instead of talking to the topic of the video that I put out there, I talk to the anticipated comments, and I try to, I throw a bunch of caveats in my videos, and I try to cut people off before they hijack my comment section. And, there's so many uncharitable trolls out there that all they're going to do is they're going to show up and nitpick. They're going to find the one thing you didn't mention, and then they're going to, make a big deal out of it and act like, oh, you didn't know that, and you're an idiot for not knowing that. No, I knew that point, but it's inconsequential nonsense. And I'm trying to deal with a larger point and deal with it in a way that doesn't waste time. I can't deal with the little nitpicks, but of course they'll they'll just claim, oh, you didn't know it and you're wrong. And, so I try to address the larger picture in my videos, and I try not to derail and digress. But to some extent, I have to caveat and I have to throw out provisos because otherwise it's just the whole discussion. If there is a comment discussion under one of my videos, I don't want it to be derailed by an uncharitable troll. I want to try to cut them off at the pass. And one of the ways I know that I've successfully achieved that objective is that my videos will have dislikes without negative comments. That's the last resort of the YouTube uncharitable troll when you head them off at the pass and anticipate their arguments and take them away from them. When they want to nitpick and your video had a preemptive strike against their nitpicks, all they do, they just get butthurt and they hit the dislike button. And I don't care. That's funny to me because I know when they do that, when they downvote and there's no negative comment for why they downvoted, I know that I got them. Anyway, sorry about that digression. I just wanted to throw that out there. So, of course, Connor Betts, who actually did kill people, his whatever websites he was visiting, they're not going to be shut down. But, of course, Christopher Hassan, who's just sort of this pretend extremist. I mean, Connor Betts is a real extremist. He's actually did what Christopher Hassan just dreamed about. But, of course, they're going to make a bigger deal out of the websites that Hassan visits versus Betts. It's just the way it is now. And I think all of the people that I'm talking to in this video, MGTOW guys, understand this already. So this is a bit of an unnecessary PSA. But for the people who don't really get it, at this point, we have to be very careful about what we do and say online. And I don't want to say, let me rephrase that. We have to be very careful about where we say what we want to say online. Because I think at this point, the powers that be at social media sites are dying to sell us down the river. They want to cooperate with authorities who are essentially going to come after our free speech and probably are going to, if we phrase something in the wrong way or if in the heat of the moment we say something we really didn't want to say, they're going to hit us with hate speech or hate crimes of some kind. And especially in countries outside of the U.S. Most of us understand that we've been surveilled to some degree for years now by federal authorities in various nations. I don't think this is breaking news to anybody listening to this video. But this Hassan case, for MGTOW guys especially, other people in the manosphere this may not apply to, this Hassan case, I think, is something we need to pay attention to and we need to be aware of. Because I think we've reached a turning point with federal authorities and their surveillance of us. So again, if you're in the United States, you mostly have the First Amendment to protect you, but it's not a get out of jail free card. You still have to be careful. But in places like Britain or Australia or anywhere else, Germany, you really, if you're a MGTOW guy, you got to be careful now because I think American authorities are, of course, looking at this Hassan case and what he was into and reaching all the wrong conclusions because, of course, they're part of a paused system. They're part of a compromised system that is designed to reach the wrong conclusions about statements made online. But in other countries, I think the authorities there are going to follow suit. And they have the power to come after MGTOW guys in ways they can't here in the States. So anyway, that was my whole point. It's a PSA. I hope it doesn't seem completely unnecessary. For those of you who know to act wisely out there, I understand this is highly unnecessary. But for guys who are still maybe in the red pill rage phase, let's say, who still want to make some pretty crazy statements and some outrageous things, I think we're at a point where those things, again, you have to be careful where you say it. I'm not telling you not to say them because in my mind, you have every right to express your disdain in the strongest way possible for the gynocentric system. But just be careful. Just be heads up and know that we may have reached a turning point where moving forward, MGTOW is on the radar screens of some very powerful people who don't like it very much. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next upload.